socio-political values often play critical roles in people's identity, psychological functioning, and interpersonal relationships, including the relationship between psychologists or therapists and their clients. So I'm going to be talking about political issues generally, but focusing in on a specific type of political issues that I call socio-political attitudes and values. And these are attitudes that people hold and opinions around things that kind of inform what many people have called the culture wars over the years. These are things that tend to have a moral content to them and things that people feel very passionately about. So I list a few examples here on the slide: abortion, affirmative action, gender role and policies, vaccine mandates, parental rights, and so forth. And these attitudes and opinions on these issues tend to have a strong emotional valence for many people. They tend to be deeply felt. They provide a frame of reference for people to understand the world, make decisions, especially moral decisions. They influence their behavior and choices, and as I'll be discussing, they even have a significant impact on their personal identity, their social identity, their self-esteem. As one commentator observed, these attitudes become central to the self. They require little cognitive effort to maintain. They're driven primarily by affect. They're experienced more intensely than most other attitudes and beliefs, and people consider them to be facts about the world. They consider them not just to be their opinions, but facts. This is the way the world is. As I go through my talk today, everything that I'll be talking about is based on research studies. Of course, I don't have time to talk about the underlying research, but just know that this is all evidence-based and based on a corpus of research. So given these kinds of attitudes, they're highly relevant in clinical practice. Surveys of clinicians say, for example, that they're among the most important factors affecting their clinical work. They arise frequently in therapy. Clients themselves frequently raise these issues, that is, their opinions on these issues. They're often related to clients presenting concerns. And this is not surprising given research showing that socio-political values often play critical roles in people's identity, psychological functioning, and interpersonal relationships, including the relationship between psychologists or therapists and their clients. And their relevance has only increased in recent years given our climate of political polarization and conflict. So I want to begin by talking about the research showing the important role that these attitudes play in people's lives. The research shows that they're an important and even somewhat essentialist feature of people's personality. They're an important component of personal identity, an important component of people's social identity, and they affect people's interpersonal relationships, often driving prejudice and discrimination. Now, I want to note that the extent to which this is the case is going to vary across individuals, of course. They're an important and somewhat essentialist feature of people's personalities. They have a strong genetic and neurological basis. And we know that heritable attitudes, that is, attitudes that have a strong genetic basis, tend to be especially strongly held, deeply felt, and relatively resistant to change. So there have been, over the last several decades, there have been a number of large-scale studies in the field known as behavior genetics, which shows that people's omnibus political attitudes, that is, whether they're liberal or conservative, for example, have a genetic basis, as well as their attitudes on particular socio-political issues like abortion and gun control. Now, you might think, well, that's odd. I'm sure there aren't genes that code for what your attitude is going to become on gun control. That's true. But there are genes, there are a host of genes that code for temperament, personality, cognitive style traits. And we know from a lot of research that these kinds of characteristics and traits play a large role in determining the kinds of political attitudes that people will come to develop, which is to say that people's personality is very tightly interwoven with their socio-political attitudes and beliefs. Socio-political attitudes and beliefs tend to be formed by early adulthood. People come to kind of solidify their beliefs by, around about age 20, 21, 22, and they remain relatively stable thereafter in most people. Yes, we all know of people that have changed their political beliefs over time, but for most people, they remain relatively stable. They're an important component of personal identity. The political really is the personal for many people. They provide a sense of meaning, comfort, security, and self-worth for people. And they often provide a psychological function similar to religious beliefs for many, especially nowadays. We find that nowadays people's political ideologies have replaced, in a lot of ways, for many people, the role that religious beliefs used to play for people some years ago. So let me just unpack these things just a little bit. How do they provide a sense of self-worth? Well, people like to think that their political beliefs, their socio-political beliefs are the good, the moral, and correct ones. And so by holding such beliefs, it helps people to feel that they are a moral and good person. And when they associate with like-minded others and join other socio-political groups, whether it be a political party or anything else, then likewise, it gives them a sense of they're affiliating with worthy causes, worthy people, worthy groups. It gives them a sense of meaning, a sense of meaning on the important moral questions of the day, a sense of security and comfort. There's been a lot of research in a field known as, this is kind of an odd term, but known as terror management theory. And the theory is that people's socio-political beliefs gives them a way to reduce anxiety about their knowledge of their impending death, their own mortality. So, for example, there have been a lot of very interesting studies, which unfortunately I don't have time to describe today, where, for example, if you in some way remind people of their own mortality, and you measure the strength of their attitudes on their own socio-political beliefs before and after you do that manipulation, you find that after that manipulation, they become more entrenched in their own socio-political beliefs, more hostile to opposing beliefs, and so on. So it's the idea that people's ideologies give them a way to understand the world, a sense of security, a sense of comfort, sense of self-worth, and thus they're very tied to their personal identity. And not surprisingly, as we all know, if you've ever gotten into arguments with people about politics, as we all have, you know that people tend to respond very defensively to any kind of threats or attacks or challenges to their socio-political worldviews, because they see it probably unconsciously as a threat to the self and their meaning system.